America really was aborted when it was just an embryonic idea, because that idea would not have allowed chattel slavery. That idea would not have allowed the genocide of the indigenous people. You know, the original idea of America, that idea would not have allowed for that country to have engaged in wars of conquest, wars of expansion, colonization, pillage, and plunder in every single decade of its existence. Now, that America was never allowed to live. That, you know, idea of justice and freedom and equality and human rights and so forth, liberty, that idea was aborted as an embryo before it even had a soul. And instead, you spawned a monster and you just gave it the same name that you had planned to give to your original baby. And I said it was aborted. It wasn't a miscarriage. It wasn't a stillbirth. This was a decision. Your founders conceived of a beautiful idea and made a decision to abort it. And I'll tell you why. Because their cultural and civilizational genetics never could produce that beautiful idea in real life. Or anyway, one of the two of them would inevitably die in the delivery. Either the idea would die or the parent would have to die. And they sure weren't ready to sacrifice their own life, their own culture, their own so-called civilization, their own heritage, and their own approach to the world for the sake of that beautiful idea. No, they wanted slaves. They wanted pillage. They wanted supremacy. So they aborted the idea of America as fast as they could. And they just told everyone that they didn't. They told everyone that the monster that they really delivered into the world was actually that beautiful idea that they had conceived earlier on. You scammed the whole world. America scammed the whole world. It's like identity theft. You know, when a con man takes on the name and social security number of a dead person and goes around pretending to be them. Well, the idea of America is dead. And the ones who killed it are walking around here calling themselves America. It's identity theft. The only difference is that the idea was killed in the womb. It never even took one breath of oxygen. America, the idea, never lived. And all you actually gave birth to, ideologically, intellectually, morally, philosophically, politically, economically, and culturally, was just more of the same corrupt and wicked bloodline of Western pirates and marauders, classists, racists, bigots, and psychopaths who give nothing to the world, nothing to humanity, but only take and devour and destroy. I mean, even everything that you make, you know, your technology and what have you, because I know you'll point to that. You always point to that as your great contribution, the West's great contribution to the world, technology. But even that was and is only achieved through bloodshed. You can't even figure out how to make something useful without having to enslave or massacre people in order to do it. Your whole technology sector was created for the purpose of war and carnage. Your technology came from your military industrial complex. You know, all of your innovations were in the killing sector before they were ever in the commercial sector. Why, you can't even make one single smartphone without tearing through 6 continents, enslaving workers in Africa, choking the air in Asia, draining South America's water, and burying the entire global South in toxic waste. If immorality was radiation, we would all drop dead the moment we use any of your technology. Sure, you made it, but you never bothered to figure out how you could make it without killing, without colonization, without slavery, without brutality, and without environmental catastrophe. You've never solved a single problem without your solution creating worse problems. Because this is just the genetics. This is what I'm talking about. This is the genetics, the civilizational genetics, the cultural genetics, the intellectual and the ideological genetics of the West. I'm not talking about so-called race or ethnicity. I'm not talking about those types of genetics. I mean, even being fixated on those incidental characteristics is exactly part of the inferior cultural and moral intellectual genetics of so-called Western civilization that I'm talking about. Because they're addicted to mislabeling the source of our problems. They're adamant about it. They insist on it. They're relentless about misidentifying the source of our problems because they never want those problems to be solved. Because just like I said before about aborting the beautiful idea of America, they knew and they know that their whole so-called civilization is the source of the problems, and you can't get rid of the problems without getting rid of the source of the problems. You can't solve the problems without getting rid of the problem maker. So they want you to always think that the problems are different than they are, that the source of the problems is different than it is. And that way they can protect themselves. They can protect their culture. They can protect their heritage and their so-called civilization, which is causing all the problems in the first place. And again, this runs through every aspect of their society. It runs through their economy, through their advertising and their marketing and so forth, and all the fake solutions that their businesses claim to provide. In fact, the main thing that they're good at manufacturing, aside from problems, is distraction, is deflection, misdirection, and phony solutions for the problems that they've created. Not only will they tell you fake solutions to real problems, they'll even try to distract you from what the real problems are by making you panic about fake problems. Everything and anything just to keep you away from the truth. Anything and everything just to keep you from reality, from understanding reality. Meanwhile, they're making reality more and more miserable for you. When your stomach hurts because you're hungry, they'll tell you it's for some reason, any reason other than you just not having food. It's because the oil price is too high, or there's a drought somewhere, or something like that. Meanwhile, he's eating while he's telling you. He's got food stains on his shirt while he's telling you all the reasons that you're hungry. Or they think you're a fool, but you go along with it. So it's hard to say that they're wrong in playing you for a fool. That's why I'm telling you. There's no such thing as America. Not the one that they put in your mind. You need to get that illusion out of your head and start seeing reality for what it really is. You think of yourself as an American, and that whole identity is a false construction built to delude and to control you and to keep you at bay. It's designed to keep you divided from everyone else in the world who are the victims of that same monster that's carrying on that ideological bloodline from Europe of feudalism, tyranny, and oppression. Because they don't want you to see yourselves as belonging to that same category of humanity as all of the other victims of Western so-called civilization. Because you are, in reality, a part of that same category of humanity. You're victims of the West. You're victims in the West, of the West, just like the rest of us. Your oligarchs don't believe you're American. Your politicians don't believe you're American. Your elite don't believe you're American. Your ruling class, you're super rich. Nobody thinks of you like that. They see you exactly the same way that they see all of their victims around the world. Just because they use different methods, don't think that that means that they think of you as being different. They just modify their tactics, but the objective is the same. The objective is subjugation, exploitation, using you and abusing you and discarding you. And I mean that literally. You know that over 20% of homeless people in America, internally displaced people in America, people with no shelter, people with no refuge in what's supposedly their own country, over 20% are elderly. People who live their whole lives serving that ruthless system just to get spat out into the gutter. And that's not something new, by the way. In Europe, they used to throw the elderly off of a cliff. This is the cultural, moral, civilizational bloodline that I'm talking about, and it's vicious. You know, the average homeless person's age is 50 in the United States. You know, they'll tell you that supposedly by that age, you're supposed to have financial security. Isn't that what they say? They say the first part of your life you learn, the second part of your life you earn, and the third part of your life you return. Isn't that the Instagram wisdom that they tell you? No, in the first part of your life in America, you yearn. In the second part of your life in America, you churn. And in the third part of your life in America, you burn. And I'm telling you that what you need to do is unlearn, discern, and overturn. Because don't think that you in America don't need to decolonize your psyche just the same as people in the Muslim world and people in the global South need to decolonize their psyche, because you do. Whether you're a Muslim in the Western diaspora, or whether you're someone who's from the global majority who's categorized in the West as a minority, or whether you're even someone who has or who comes from Western heritage, you need to decolonize your psyche the same as anyone else in the global South needs to do it. Anyone in the former colonized countries, the currently neo-colonized countries, because you're just as psychologically colonized as the rest of us. In fact, you have to do even more, because not only do you have to psychologically decolonize, you have to psychologically decolonizerize. Whether your heritage is from the global South or from the West, this applies to you. Because like I said before, you're actually slaves in Pharaoh's palace, but you think that you're part of the royal family, but you're not. I see this a lot with diaspora Muslims in the West. They have that colonized immigrant mentality, the inferiority complex in relation to Westerners. but simultaneously they have a Western superiority complex in relation to the Muslim world and in relation to the global South. And both sides of this split personality, this fractured psyche, both sides don't recognize the West for what it is, or America for what it is. And it's precisely because they believe in this illusion that they have an inferiority complex in relation to Westerners, because they've internalized Western supremacy as legitimate. And for the same reason, they look down on their brothers and sisters outside the West. You've let yourselves get tricked, you know? You've let yourselves get tricked into thinking that proximity means you're on the same side. Just because you can photobomb the great American selfie, you think you're a part of the friend group. But that's like a soccer ball thinking that it's a member of the team and not just something that both teams kick around to win the game, because that's what you are to them. And that's how they see you, and that's how they treat you. You know, only about 5 to 10% of the people in the United States of America are actually enjoying the supposedly unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And it's at the expense of the other 90 to 95% of the people. And that same ratio is played out on the world stage. Only about 10% of the global population come from the colonizing nations of the world, and the rest of the 90% are under their boots. So in fact, the overwhelming majority of you in America and across the West, the overwhelming majority of you are in the same position in your own countries as the colonized countries are in the world. You're under the same boots that we're under. 5 to 10% of the people in just 10% of the countries in the world are dominating 90 to 95% of the rest of the population on this earth, in the global South and in the global North, in the East and in the West. And before you misunderstand me, I'm not saying that the few ruling over the many is a bad thing in and of itself. That sort of ratio is always going to be the case. It's always been the case and always will be the case. That's the nature of authority and power. There's always going to be fewer people who rule than there are people who are ruled. But how are they ruling is the question. That's the issue. What's their qualification? The qualification is supposed to be wisdom. It's supposed to be decency, loyalty to the people, concern for the people, insight, understanding, honesty, conviction, moral uprightness, consistency in their principles, virtue, dedication to serving the greater good. I mean, can you name even one single leader in the West, in the Western world, who has even one of these qualifications? Forget about having all of the qualifications. Any leader in America or in the West who even has one of these qualities. Well, you and I know that they embody the opposite of every single one of these qualifications for leadership. They're unwise, they're indecent, they're disloyal, they have contempt for the population, not concern, they're dishonest, they're uncommitted, they're amoral, and blatantly hypocritical. They're unvirtuous, and they couldn't care less about serving the greater good of their societies. They're selfish, not selfless. They're public servants who have made the public servants. And as long as you play along with them, playing you for a fool, then you are a fool. You're a fool if you identify with being an American, unless you're part of that 5 to 10% of the population who have over a 7-figure income. I'm telling you, you need to stop identifying yourself according to your fake nation and start identifying yourself according to your real situation. Because look, there's all sorts of ways to group, identify, and organize people. And one of the most meaningless ways to do it is by location. That's where citizenship or nationality really comes down to. You know, all the people in this room are the same. Even if that room is a jail cell and some of the people in the jail cell are prisoners and others in the jail cell are prison guards. The people in that room are not the same. They're not in the same situation. And they would have to be out of their minds to think that they are in the same situation. Well, that's you. You're prisoners in the cell, and the guards are in the cell with you. They're beating you with their clubs, and you're in there thinking that you're all the same because you're all in the same room. That's why they play you for a fool, because you act like a fool. If you have any sense, if you have any intelligence, you will identify yourself according to your situation, according to your condition, not according to your location. A country is nothing but a usually diverse population of people who have all agreed to have a territorial national identity, meaning this is an agreement to one degree or another. It's an agreement by all those people to define themselves according to this completely insubstantial criterion. And that criterion then divides them from people who are in the exact same situation as them, but who are in that situation, that same situation, in a different territory. Please understand. You can choose to define yourself according to other criteria, more intelligent criteria. So, for example, if you're hungry, okay, you're hungry in one room, and I'm hungry in another room, and the same person is taking food from both of us, but that person happens to stay in the same room that you're in. So are you going to be on his side or mine? Is the fact that he stays in the same room with you going to make you think that you and him have more in common than you and me? That's not intelligent. But that's the way they've got you thinking. So, I mean, think about BRICS. BRICS is organized according to countries, but it's also organized according to other shared criteria, economic criteria, development criteria, and so on. And it's based on some degree, whether they say it explicitly or not, it's based on some degree of shared experience between all BRICS members of being historically targets of Western aggression. And I'm saying, why can't you organize in the same way, according to the same types of criteria as BRICS, except minus the country part? In other words, organize as populations, not as countries. As populations who share the same situations, the same circumstances, the same conditions, even if it's not in the same locations. But of course, first of all, you have to start identifying like this, identifying yourself according to a set of criteria that actually means something, and then feeling and pursuing solidarity with others who fit that same set of criteria. Because the truth is, you share in America, most of you share circumstances, economic circumstances, similar to the people of the Global South. You share similar struggles with development issues as the people in the Global South. I mean, just look at the state of your cities, your inner cities, your infrastructure, your water supply, your sanitation, even your power grids, even your internet, your public health services, and so on. Well, there are many places in the Global South, many countries in the Global South that have it better off than you. And you share being a target of Western aggression and subjugation for millions of Americans. The only thing that you don't have in common with the people of the Global South is just your location. I mean, think about it. This is exactly what the colonizers did in our lands. They carved up territory. They sliced whole communities up between newly drawn borders. They divided people who have common characteristics, from the same tribe, same heritage, language, culture, and so on. And they left some of them on this side of the national boundary and some on that side of the national boundary. And then they told them that they were now this or that nationality, that they had this or that citizenship. So, for example, you're Kenyan or Tanzanian when actually you're Maasai, or you're Pakistani or Afghani when actually you're Pathan or Pashtun, or you're Lebanese or Syrian or Palestinian or what have you, even though you're the people of Bilad Hashem. Or you're Kurdish, but now you have to either be Iraqi or Turkish or Iranian or Syrian. The Tuareg are now either Libyan or Nigerian or Algerian or what have you. Well, the same thing applies to you in the West, in America. You're divided from the people with whom you actually have the most in common. Because instead of defining yourselves as a group, defining and identifying yourselves according to your situation as a group, your conditions as a group, you define yourselves and you identify by your so-called nationality, which does nothing but isolate you and weaken you. Because believe me, the rich don't do that. The rich do not do that. And the rich are the only ones in America who get to enjoy the so-called rights and privileges of being American. But they don't identify that way. They don't define themselves that way. And they and their group transcend the borders that they keep you locked in. Just like how a prison guard is not locked in the prison with the inmates. They can go where they want. The rich float above borders, and they constitute a nation unto themselves. Their loyalty is to their class, not to their country. And they know perfectly well how artificial and how arbitrary and how fake that is. Nationalities and national boundaries are only for the poor. You've heard of Doctors Without Borders, Reporters Without Borders. Well, the rich are rulers without borders. And one of the ways that they rule you is by keeping you within the boundaries that they themselves transcend. I'm talking about mentally, psychologically, and in terms of your sense of identity. They keep you within those borders. while they operate without borders. You know, they know that they have more in common with a billionaire in South Africa than they have in common with you, even though you might just live a few streets away from them. So you need a vision that transcends borders, a vision that unites, not by the lines that are drawn on a map, but by the shared struggles that we all face as people. We've seen the power of organizations like BRICS, which gather nations under a banner of common interests. But I'm saying, why should we limit ourselves to the confines of countries? Why can't we organize as populations? Populations that share the same conditions, the same circumstances, the same fight for dignity and justice. I mean, look around you. We're living at a time when economic disparity is rampant. Most of us are grappling with poverty, with unemployment, with lack of opportunity. We find ourselves in communities where the infrastructure is crumbling, where our schools are underfunded, where healthcare is a luxury rather than a right. These are not just the issues of one nation. These are the struggles of most of the people on earth. We have to recognize that millions of us, regardless of where we live, share the same economic conditions, and we've all been targets of Western aggression. We've all felt the misery of subjugation. Whether you're in the inner cities of America or in the rural villages of the global South, the chains of exploitation bind us together. We're in the same chains, and that's a foundation for unity. That's a foundation for solidarity. It's time to build networks that connect us. We should create coalitions that bring together individuals and groups who share the same struggles, regardless of where they're located. I mean, we have the technology, we have the means, and the spirit to reach out to one another, to communicate, to collaborate, to stand in solidarity together. We can build a platform like that, that amplifies our voices and advocates for our rights. Develop a unified voice that speaks for the marginalized, the disenfranchised, the oppressed. Strategize for policies that address our shared challenges and together demand the dignity that we deserve. Our struggles are interconnected and our liberation is bound together. And that's exactly why they want you to think of yourselves according to these divisive and restrictive and reductive identities. So you have to be ready to identify yourselves, not just as citizens of a country, but as part of a global population that shares the same fight. You have to be ready to pursue solidarity with those who face the same conditions, the same struggles, the same dreams for a better future that you do. That's what Middle Nation is committed to. Our priority, of course, is with the Muslims in the Muslim world and in the diaspora. We're committed to the economic sovereignty, political independence, and psychological decolonization of our people, and for all of the people of the global South more broadly. But that also includes all the subjugated, exploited, and used and abused 90% of the people of the West. Now, this doesn't represent a revolution. No, it's a restoration of balance, restoration of proportion and fairness. It's not militancy, it's moderation, because no one is actually more militant than the Western elites who literally command and wield the militaries of their countries against the rest of us, and who militarize their police and security forces against their own populations in their own countries. We're not aiming to overthrow anything, but to lift up the global majority who have themselves been thrown down, thrown under, and run over. And as for that fanatic and psychopathic 10% elite minority from the Western 10% of the global population, where you have no credibility, you have no respectability, and you have no qualifications. We know that every single word you say is a lie, and every action that you take is against us. You've never achieved anything except at our expense. You never created anything except that you destroyed more in the process. And everything you have by means of deception, exploitation, expropriation, colonization, and violent subjugation. You may be at the top of the class hierarchy, but at the bottom of the moral hierarchy. You're classists with no class. You have power, but you have no authority. You are billionaires who have been held up by billions of hands from the 90% of the global population, crowd surfing on the global south, crowd surfing on the underclass, crowd surfing on the working class. And you've been doing it for a long time, so don't be too surprised when we decide to drop you.